Okay, welcome back. This is the final video in the Dissertation Writers Workshop asynchronous resource from the Writing Hub at UC San Diego. So we're now at part 4. Again, if you haven't watched part 1, 2, or 3, we do recommend you watch those first. In this video, we'll talk about strategies for getting it done. That means strategies for sustaining yourself as a writer in the process of finishing your dissertation. There's also a companion worksheet that goes along with this resource, and we do recommend you engage with the companion worksheet to get those guided exercises and additional exploration to help you dig deeper into these topics. To recap from part 3, we talked about how to create coherence between the substantive chapters of your dissertation. As a reminder, you'll set up an initial challenge or knowledge problem in the introduction of your dissertation. And then each chapter addresses and generates an understanding about some aspect of that challenge, and each chapter will be able to make its own individual contribution. So each chapter individually makes a sub-argument related to the central challenge and supports that argument with analytical material or data. But in addition to making their own individual contributions, all the chapters need to work together as a team. And so that occurs not just in the introduction when you set up the knowledge problem. It also occurs in between the chapters in how you frame the next chapter based on what's in the conclusion of the preceding chapter. So pay attention to the conclusion and the introduction sections within each individual chapter, because there's opportunity there to create coherence. There's also opportunity to create coherence when you transition from your final substantive chapter toward your conclusion. And so in your conclusion, you'll pull the threads back together and show how they combined speak to that challenge. So you'll create that coherence in multiple places. You also create coherence through thinking about broader theoretical themes. And as a reminder, your challenge or knowledge problem is something empirical. It's something that we could observe in the world or in the material or in the artworks that we're working with, but it's something that we don't yet know enough about, and we could study it. Theoretical themes are ideas for thinking about those empirical challenges, ways of understanding their nature. And so themes offer overarching thought frameworks that help the dissertation tell the reader how to think about the challenge that is being presented. So your introduction will create a research space for the empirical challenge and suggest the theoretical themes, that is some of the grounding literatures from your field and from your discipline that you can use and you can present to the reader to help them understand the nature of the challenge. Depending on your dissertation requirements, your introduction might also preview the themes, data, arguments, etc., of what is ensuing in the dissertation. So it might offer a roadmap. In each substantive chapter of the dissertation, you'll introduce a sub-argument about the challenge and support it with evidence. And you'll also draw upon those theoretical themes again in how you set up that argument and in how you argue the implications of the findings or the implications of that argument. And in each substantive chapter, you'll not only uncover an aspect of the empirical challenge, but also how your reader can think about that aspect of the empirical challenge. And finally, in your conclusion, you'll bring all of the conclusions from each substantive chapter together into a broader argument about the empirical challenge. And you'll also revisit those theoretical themes and think about how the dissertation can advance our understanding in those areas or in that body of scholarship. So you might think about how people who study that kind of thing can benefit from reading and learning from your dissertation research. And that will leave the reader not only with a kind of empirical closure, the knowledge problem will be resolved, it will also leave them with thematic closure. So now we're at part 4, strategies for getting it done. And the key question we're going to try to answer in this video is, how do I survive the writing process? In fact, an even better question, how can I thrive in the writing process. You can actually thrive in the process of writing your dissertation. And we hope that this video offers some starting points for strategies for doing just that. But before we begin, it is of course important to think about where we're starting from. I really like this question. What would go into your scholar autobiography? So think about the unique pathway of experiences, people, and lessons that led you to this particular project in this particular program. I think it's important to think about how we got here, how we got to this moment in our lives. So I would really encourage you to take a moment, go to the companion worksheet, and trace those steps. How did you get from your past to your present? What kinds of key highlights would go into your scholar autobiography? And the reason for this reflection will become clear in just a moment, but do take a moment to do it. So one reason why we suggest thinking about your scholar autobiography is for you to realize that there is a lot that has gone into it. And so I like this quote a lot, and in a minute, I'm going to paraphrase it with regard to writing. The quote is, "People take the longest possible paths, digress to numerous dead ends, and make all kinds of mistakes. Then historians, no offense historians come along and write summaries of this messy, nonlinear process and make it appear like a simple straight line." So let's paraphrase this to be about writing. In the writing process, writers take the longest possible paths, digress to numerous dead ends, and make all kinds of mistakes. But writing products summarize this messy, nonlinear process and make it appear like a simple straight line. And so by this, we mean when you look at a dissertation or a book or an article or any finished writing product, what you don't see when you read that writing product is the process. You don't see how messy and confusing and nonlinear that process actually was. And then when you go about writing your own writing product and you experience that messy, nonlinear process, it can feel very disheartening and it can feel very overwhelming. And you might internalize that messy, nonlinear experience as something that's wrong with you, or something that's wrong with your research, or something that is evidence of inadequacy or not doing something well enough. But that's just not true. The process is messy. The process is nonlinear. The process generates confusion. And so a finished dissertation will collapse all of that and summarize it into a simple straight line. The truth is, as a writer of a dissertation, you're going to be engaged in that very messy, nonlinear process. So here's what's important to keep in mind, and this is why we also started with a scholar autobiography. We can't give you a formula for how to write a dissertation or what your writing process should look like, because what works for you as a writer is really personal to you. We're all different and we all are developing as writers in different ways, and that's great. That diversity is wonderful. How you engage in the writing process for your dissertation will also realistically depend on how much time you have. If you're up against a defense deadline, then your process is going to look really different than if you have another year or two before you need to defend. That process is also going to be challenging in its own way. And so your process will depend on how much time you have, and the challenge that you'll encounter in that process will be structured by how much time you have. But no matter how you write your dissertation or what writing process you want to engage in, here's one thing we can tell you for sure. Writing a dissertation isn't just about generating a lot of words based on your work or your research. Writing a dissertation is also a process of realizing how far you've come in grad school and in life. So I want you to think back to who you were before you started grad school, what you were like as a person, what you were like as a thinker. And now I want you to think about where you are now. I want you to think about how you got to this point, the dead ends that you pursued, or the successes and triumphs that you experienced, the challenges you went through and how you came through that. Writing a dissertation isn't just about generating a long, complex writing product. It's also an experience. And it's an experience that you get through being in grad school, right at the end of grad school. So without realizing it, perhaps, you have become a new person. You have become a thinker in this discipline and in this field. It happened perhaps slowly and perhaps imperceptibly, but maybe it happened fast and forcefully. But you have become a different kind of thinker, partly because of the knowledge and the experiences and the insights and perspectives that you've been able to gain throughout your time in grad school. And so the dissertation is both a manifestation of that change as well as a symbol for that change. You have been involved in a very long process of becoming. And because the dissertation happens right at the end of that process, there's a lot of emotional baggage that comes with writing the dissertation. It's the last thing that you'll ever do as a student. At this point, after getting your dissertation defended and finishing with your doctorate, that's the end. That's the highest degree in a field. And unless you start in a different field and become a student of something else, which you might, this is the end of a very long process of your student self. Writing a dissertation has that kind of meaning. And so it's not just a technical document. It's not just research writing. It's something personal. It has a lot to do with your whole scholarly autobiography coming up in this moment. But it's not the end of the road. It is worth it to acknowledge the meaning of the dissertation in the trajectory of your life, both your scholarly life as well as your life in general. It's worth it to acknowledge the meaning of grad school in your development as a person and what the dissertation means in all of that. But remember, it's not the end. Sit with that discomfort, sit with that acknowledgement, sit with the meaning of what your dissertation means in the trajectory of your life, and then keep going. Your path extends far beyond grad school, I promise. So remember that your dissertation is not the culminating activity of your research life, but it is an important culminating activity of one part of your research life that has taken a long time to get here. There will be more after this. And so remember that it's not everything, but it's also not nothing. So sit with that for a while. Think about what your dissertation is going to mean to you, both in the process of composing it, but also once it's over and defended. And sit with that and then keep going. So what you need to know about writing the dissertation, about composing the dissertation, is that it is an incredibly iterative process. You will go back and forth between the chapters, the data or material that you use, the introduction and the conclusion, because they will all start to inform each other. They will all start to coalesce with each other at some point. And so you'll go back and forth between all of these different elements of the material you're working with and the actual thing that you're writing, let alone all of the different pieces of the thing that you're writing. And that's okay. In fact, that's proof. When you're going back and forth between different aspects of your dissertation and your data or material, that's how you know it's getting good. That's how you know it's getting more coherent when you're going back and forth. But it's important to try to avoid being like a pinball, bouncing around the dissertation without a lot of focus. You will make controlled shifts between one part of the project to another part of the project. But if you feel yourself kind of bouncing around haphazardly and it doesn't feel controlled, it doesn't feel like you are intentionally moving from one aspect of the dissertation to another, then you need to give yourself some time to sit with one piece a little bit longer until you can make a controlled shift. But don't be scared off or worried by the fact that you are engaging in an iterative process. Don't be worried about the fact that you will be going back and forth or that that is happening to you. Be mindful in how you make those shifts, but don't be worried about making those shifts in the first place. So it is important to sit with a chapter or a section Slightly longer than feels comfortable. This is especially true if you find yourself bouncing around the dissertation or bouncing around all over the place in your research project. Sit with the chapter just a little bit longer than feels natural or feels comfortable. It's okay if you don't know what you're doing with the chapter. It's okay if you don't know exactly where you're going with it. You can swim in the dark with it, and it will become clear as you sit with it. Remember that the discomfort that you feel when you're engaging in a piece of writing like this is proof. The discomfort is proof that you are working on something complex. The discomfort is proof that you care a lot about what you're arguing and what you're trying to say. And it's proof that you're in a very complex analytical process of trying to find something that has no easy answer. If what you are studying had an easy answer, we wouldn't need a dissertation about it. But what you're studying isn't easy because there is a dissertation about it. So that discomfort of not knowing, that's part of it. And it's proof that you're on the right track. So sit with it. Also remember that the discomfort is temporary. It won't last forever, I promise. If you sit with the discomfort, insight will happen, even if it's small, even if it's tiny, even if it's just one tiny feather of an idea. It will come, and you can follow that feather and see where it goes. The discomfort won't last, so sit with it. Let the discomfort in. Welcome it like an old friend. Remember that discomfort that you feel about not knowing what a chapter is going to do, not knowing where you're going, that's productive. Let this discomfort be productive. Let it in and welcome it. Allow yourself the opportunity to see each chapter or each difficult part of your dissertation through to a controlled pausing point. It doesn't mean that you see it through till it's finished. You see it to a point where you can intentionally press pause on that aspect of the dissertation. You'll know that it isn't finished, and you will come back to revise it. And we call this an opportunity because that's exactly how we mean it. By allowing yourself to sit with that discomfort and to see each chapter through to a controlled and intentional pause point, you're giving yourself an opportunity to discover and learn more. You're also giving yourself an opportunity to overcome that discomfort of not knowing. And the more you get comfortable with discomfort, the less difficult discomfort becomes in the future. So the more comfortable with discomfort you are, the more you can tolerate that discomfort, which means you're just going to write more and more joyfully in the future. So in the rest of this video, we're going to talk about strategies for thinking about how to engage with the writing process. And these strategies, the basic framework for these strategies are adopted from this book by Helen Sword, but you won't find all of these strategies in the Helen Sword book. We're using the base structure that Helen Sword uses, but we're also putting in additional strategies into that base structure that you won't find in that book. So by base, Helen Sword refers to these as behavioral, artisanal, social, and emotional. Behavioral means changes in your daily habits, in your behaviors around writing. Artisanal means ways of thinking about yourself as a writer, as an artisan. Social means how you engage others in the writing process. And emotional involves inviting positive feelings and positive self-talk and positive language into how you experience the writing process. So let's dig into each of these. So starting with behavioral. One of the most impactful behavioral changes that you can make or behavioral strategies that you can employ is to cultivate a regular writing habit. And so what does it mean to write regularly? I'm going to use a metaphor for this because writing regularly looks different for different people based on their life and their circumstances and their habits and the way that they exist in the world. So writing regularly might not have the same number for everyone. It might not mean every day or 5 times a week for everyone. For everyone, their number might be different. And so you can tell it that you're writing regularly based on how you feel. And so a metaphor for thinking about writing regularly is, are you writing regularly enough that your ideas are in the front seat? So I want you to imagine that you're in a 2-door car. If you're in a 2-door car, it's a small car. What's in the front seat is very close to you. You can just reach out and touch it and grab it with almost no effort because it's close by. Now I want you to imagine that you're in a 4-door car, so a slightly larger car, and that your ideas might be in the back seat of that car. You can still get to them. You might have to reach across the back of the car and it might take you a little bit of stretch, but you could get to it and it wouldn't be too bad. Now imagine that you're sitting on a bus and you're driving the bus and your idea is toward the back of the bus. Now, to go get that idea and to touch it, you'd have to get up, walk down the aisle, and then go and get it. So considerably more effort. I think you can see where I'm going with this. One last metaphor. Imagine you were flying an airplane, or you were at the front of a big passenger jet airplane. And your idea was all the way in the back of the airplane near the rear lavatories where the flight attendants are. That's going to take much more effort to get up, walk to the back of the plane, and to get your idea there. So you can tell that you're writing regularly if it feels like you can access your ideas easily and you can access your writing easily without a lot of additional effort. So your ideas are in the front seat. They're right next to you. Another way that you can feel that you're writing regularly, if you know that you're writing enough to avoid procrastination. If procrastination is starting to happen often or all the time, that's an indicator that you're not writing regularly. And so writing regularly also means that you are avoiding procrastination. And it's enough to feel like you're making steady progress. So if you feel like you're making steady progress, that means you're not making one giant leap of progress one day and then no progress for 6 months. If you're making steady, sustainable progress on your dissertation, that probably is an indicator that you are writing regularly. Another thing that you can do in terms of the behavioral strategies is to consider your writing space and place. There isn't one magical place that can be generative or productive for your writing. So lots of folks think that they can only get writing done in a coffee shop or in their office or in the library. Actually, many places can be generative and not generative for different purposes in the writing process. So you can start to think about the spaces that you can access in your life and build in some spatialized rituals for your writing process. For example, when things are open up again, you might find that you get a lot of good technical work done in your office, where you are analyzing data, or you are putting captions onto figures, or you are doing citations or something like that, kind of technically detailed work. But you don't get that technical detail work done very well when you're at home or when you're in the library. That's fine. If you have something that you need to do in your dissertation that's more of the technical detail, you can connect doing that kind of work to being in your office. So you can go to your office to do that kind of work. You don't have to only do that work in the office, so you don't have to fetishize that ritual. But you can think about building spatialized rituals or spatially informed rituals into your writing process based on the spaces and places you have access to and how those spaces and places are differently productive for you. And then finally, something that you can do in the behavioral dimension is to help your writing become more meditative and calming. And so you can do this by engaging in behaviors that are broadly recognized as useful. So unplugging, for example, turning off your email, turning off your social media, turning off your phone if you can. If you don't need Wi-Fi, turning that off. So unplugging might be a way to be meditative. Other ways to do it is just to treat technology like the tool that it is. So if you don't need a kind of aspect of your technology, like if you don't need your laptop, or if you don't need, as I mentioned before, Wi-Fi, if you don't need your phone, remember that's just a tool and allow yourself to unplug. There's also other ways to turn down the volume of your life. And so think about what that might be. Think about things that you could do that would calm you. And then the key is to fuse what you're doing in those ideas or in those actions with your dissertation writing. So for example, if you have an idea for something that would help you be more calm, and you might think the dissertation is the antithesis of calm in my life. The dissertation is what makes me feel not calm. Yes, I understand. But if there is something that you can do that will help you feel more calm, and then if you can slowly and gradually start to associate working on your dissertation or even just thinking about your dissertation with that calming ritual, eventually that will help your brain bring those two things together and create an association between those things. So if you can do that and create rituals for writing that are also calming or also help calm you, that's a really good idea. So at this point, you can pause the video and explore these key reflection questions for building a regular writing habit. The first is, what would writing regularly look like for you? And also, what would it feel like for you? We're all different. And so what writing regularly means for me might be different and probably is different than what it means for you. So start thinking about what that would look like for you in terms of a number, days in the week, but also how it would feel. In addition, you can consider spaces and rituals that you can cultivate right now. So we talked about creating spatialized writing rituals or having different kinds of things that you work on in different kinds of spaces and places. So you can start thinking about the spaces and places you can access now, even if that's just different rooms in your apartment, that's okay. And where you might generate writing rituals within those spaces. And then there's an opportunity to reflect on what you can do to turn down the volume of your life and feel more calm, and how you might couple those rituals with dissertation writing. So at this point, I'll invite you to pause and explore these reflection questions in the worksheet. Moving on to these artisanal writing strategies, it's important to start thinking of yourself as a writer. So think of writing as a craft, something that gets better with practice. So you might think that there's lots of crafts out there. There are people who make cheese, and there are people who do woodworking. There are people who build chess sets out of reclaimed wood. There's all kinds of crafts out there. But someone who is a crafter, someone who engages in that craft, doesn't start knowing how to do that. They don't start knowing how to do it well. It takes time and practice, because that's what makes a craft a craft. And writing is exactly like that. Writing is a craft, and it can and does get better with practice. That means that as a writer, you can intervene in your own process. Sometimes we give the writing process that we naturally practice way too much determination in our life. We think that our writing process is what it is, and I can't change it. That's just how I write. I can't help it. But you can. You can intervene in your process because you're a writer. You are engaged in the craft. And so you can try out different ways of engaging with that craft and see how it helps or see how it doesn't help, but you can make decisions. This also means that you can give yourself grace even when you're up against a deadline. So if writing is not coming as easily as you think it should, or if it's taking you longer than you think it should, or if it's not looking to you the way it should, that's okay. Think about a sculptor learning how to create something out of a brand new medium. It takes time to do that. And so even when you're up against a deadline, even if you submit a writing project or a writing product that you know could be better, embrace that with a learner's mindset. Remember that you are engaged in an ongoing process of developing yourself in this craft. And then importantly, reconsider the technologies of your craft. So people who work with in crafts often engage in a lot of different kinds of materials. So a sculptor, for example, they might try sculpting in wood and then marble and ice maybe, but there's different mediums that they can use for their craft. The same is true for you as a writer engaged in this craft. Different technologies that you can use for writing will afford different experiences. If you've ever tried writing an entire paper by hand on a piece of paper, you know this, that what you do in a Word document versus what you do in another kind of composition software versus what you can do with a paper and pen are all different because technologies afford different experiences. So if you're feeling stuck or if you want to try a different kind of artisanal strategy for yourself as a writer, try working outside of your Word document or whatever other processing software you typically use. Try a new technology. That technology can be something really simple, like note cards or Post-it. Here's a picture that I actually used when I was working on my dissertation. Each Post-it has an idea. The colors mean different things to me. And I literally just started moving the Post-its around and seeing how they work together. Obviously, a whiteboard can also be really helpful to reverse outline what you have written, to outline what you want to write in the future, and to start thinking about what revisions you want to make based on what you have written or need to write. Technologies could also take the form of other softwares. So you could try putting your dissertation chapter into the form of a PowerPoint. The usefulness of that is that PowerPoint is extremely linear. You have to go one slide at a time, and there's only so much that can fit in one particular slide. So try reworking your chapter into a PowerPoint presentation. OneNote is part of the Microsoft Office suite, and it's basically a free canvas. If you have a touch screen or a stylus that you can use with a touch screen, you can literally draw in OneNote, but you can also click around OneNote and add text boxes all over the place. It's a free form canvas, and it's part of Microsoft Office. FreeMind is one of many mind mapping softwares that you can use to sort of let your ideas flourish and start to see how ideas can be connected to each other. So these are all technologies that you can try that is not your Word document, but can still help you generate ideas, think through points where you feel stuck or confused, and discover opportunities for putting into words what you're thinking and what you're struggling with in your mind. You can also use genre as a technology. So here, for example, you could write a dialogue between your chapters. If you worked on the worksheet after the part 3 video, you have already got some practice with this. You could write a chapter as a poem, maybe as a haiku. You could write a story about one of the research agents that is involved in your research project, and you could write that story even using the hero's journey archetype. You could write a letter. You could write a letter to your past self, your future self. You could write a letter for a time capsule. You could write a letter to your data. You could write your research autobiography, which is something we suggested you do at the first part of this video. You could write a user's guide for your dissertation topic. So imagine a new graduate student is going to come to the department in 5 years and want to study your same topic. What kind of information would you put in a user guide for that grad student? The key to all of these is to write. Remember to think of yourself as a writer because you are. And so even if you're writing a user's guide or a letter or a poem or a story, as long as it's about your research, that is still research writing, and it will help you in your dissertation. The value of these kinds of writing prompts is indirect and direct. It's direct insofar as you might generate words that you can actually use in your dissertation, but it's also indirect because it helps you discover ideas, make connections, create connections between things that seemed really disconnected or disparate. And that indirect benefit will have a value when you start working in your dissertation again, because you'll not only have the idea in your head, the prose that you will use to articulate that idea will come faster and it will be clearer. Writing prompts are also helpful because they get you out of that idea that I just don't know what I'm doing. So when it comes to dissertations, which are naturally confusing, it's really easy to feel stuck because we don't know what we're doing and to pause our writing because we feel like we can't proceed until we know what we're doing. So a writing prompt like a poem or a story gets you out of that. You know exactly what you're doing. It constrains the relevant information that you can include, and that helps break you free from the genre of the dissertation and its constraints. And again, by engaging in these kinds of writing prompts, you open yourself up for discovery and maybe even enjoyment. And wouldn't that be nice? So in part 4C of the companion worksheet, you'll see a few writing prompts that you can try. You can also try these writing prompts as well, but do give them a try. You'll be surprised what you find. Some additional artisanal habits that I think are really, really valuable is first to make a task list. A task list is like an outline, but not exactly an outline. An outline overviews what needs to happen in the writing product. So it overviews the introduction or this section or that section. A task list breaks out those outlines into actions, things that you have to do, tasks that you need to check off in order to be able to achieve that part of the outline. So kinds of tasks that you might include in a task list are writing tasks, which just means generating words on the page. But your task could also include reading tasks if you're involved in the literature or trying to get bring in ideas from the literature. It could involve research tasks in the form of working with your data or working with the presentation of your data. And they can also involve revising tasks. So reworking what you have and changing what you've already written. Another habit that I think is especially useful is for tracking your rabbits. Rabbits are random thoughts that pop up and pop into your head, usually while you're working on something else. And it's really easy to follow the rabbit and to let that rabbit take you right down a rabbit hole. A common example of this that I see is when you're working on a piece of writing and you feel the need to look up a citation. And then you go onto Google Scholar or PubMed or JSTOR and you look up the citation, but then you also start looking up other citations. You look at the citations within that citation. And before you know it, you spent 20 minutes on JSTOR following a rabbit down a rabbit hole. And so the key part of this habit is not to follow the rabbit, but to sit intentionally with the tasks you've set out for yourself and keep a note page nearby. You can track your rabbits, and at the end of your session or at the end of that task, you can ask yourself whether or not that rabbit deserves to become its own task, and then you can add it to your task list. Finally, I recommend starting a document or a folder that will hold the things that don't make the cut. Remember that you have a lot of information to work with, and it's not all going to make it to the dissertation, and that's okay. Start a document or a folder or some repository where you can collect all the stray pieces. Stray pieces might be ideas that you thought you were going to write about, but you're not going to write about. They might be literal paragraphs and sentences that you cut from your dissertation and replace with something else. You can create a cutting room floor document that holds it all, and you know exactly where to find it in the future. So moving on to the social part of the strategies, it's really important to bring others into the process. Writing is solitary, but it doesn't have to be lonely. Writing is solitary because at the end of the day, we're trying to harness our thoughts into words that we write, and it has our name on it. But just because you're writing a document that is yours and yours alone doesn't mean you have to do that by yourself. There is, in fact, no such thing as a solo lone author. All writing is social because all writing is happening in a social relationship between the writer and the reader. So even when you're writing by yourself, you are imagining another person, even if you're doing that unconsciously. So you are engaged in a kind of social relationship with an imaginary person, i.e. your reader, even when you're sitting in your room by yourself writing. There is no such thing as the writer who writes alone. So it's really useful to make room for others in your writing process. This might mean writing for others. So allowing yourself to picture your reader, actually picture a human being person that you know and write for them. Write for them intentionally and tell them stories. It might also mean writing with others. So inviting readers into your drafts and revision and inviting their readers' feedback so that you can see how your writing is being experienced by your readers. It might also entail writing in the company of others, so writing among other people, so other peers who are working on their projects. You can write together and form a writing group with them, or you can come to the writing room at the Writing Hub and do it there. And of course, you can also talk to other people about what you're writing, even if you're not showing them your draft, and even if you're not exactly sure what you're talking about, you can just talk to people. You can talk to other people about your ideas. And then the act of having to articulate and have a conversation about those ideas helps it get clearer, and it also helps you feel more connected. And finally, making room for others also means finding dissertation allies who can support you in this process and instituting regular accountability. And just a quick note on what accountability is. Accountability might not be what you want, but it's probably what you need. We all need accountability. But the kind of accountability that we need is going to depend on us. There's different things that will work for different people. So generally, we like to think of accountability as happening in different dimensions. On the one dimension, there's punishment and reward. So that is, what's the consequence for meeting or not meeting your goal? On the negative side is punishment that coerces you into meeting the goal. On the positive side is reward. And so you feel enticed to go toward your goal. And the other dimension is internal and external. This has to do with who you tell your goal to. So an internal kind of accountability is where you're just telling yourself. You set the goal with yourself, maybe you write it in your planner, but no other human being knows that that's your goal. That's a perfectly fine kind of accountability. External accountability means when you state your goal to someone else, to a friend or a family member or your advisor. And so accountability happens within these dimensions. I don't recommend you engage in internal punishment-based accountability. I actually think that is pretty difficult for a single individual to do. And also, real talk, you're probably already punishing yourself if you're not meeting your writing goals and meeting your writing deadlines. You're punishing yourself in the form of self-talk and negative ideas about yourself and negative beliefs. So I would recommend staying away from this as much as you can. If you're able to regulate rewards for yourself, then this is a perfectly fine way to have accountability, where you set a goal with yourself and you also tell yourself what the reward will be if and when you meet that goal. And then if you meet the goal, you get the reward. I find this kind of accountability challenging personally because I have a hard time withholding rewards from myself if it's something I really want. I personally think that external accountability can be the most powerful kind. An external punishment-based accountability would mean that you set with someone else both your goal and the consequence or punishment of not achieving that goal. So I once told my friend that if I didn't meet my writing goal, that I would have to eat black licorice in front of her. And I hate black licorice, and so this was a real punishment. And it was a sufficiently intense punishment that I avoided it as much as I possibly could. However, it's important to remember that punishment-based accountability can't sustain you. It's good in the short term, but ultimately doesn't help you build better habits. Everything we know from psychology reminds us of this, that to build better habits in the long term, you need positive reinforcement. And that's why I think external reward-based accountability is the best, the healthiest, and the most fulfilling. So for this, you might say to your friend, hey, if we each meet these writing goals, let's go watch a movie on Friday night, or we can have a potluck dinner. And that's a kind of reward-based accountability that is also external because you make it with your friend. When I was working on my dissertation, I engaged members of my family in a kind of external reward all the time. I would tell them my writing goals each week, And at the end of the week, if I met those goals, all my family had to do was tell me that they were proud of me. And that was a sufficient reward to keep me going. It was like food for my spirit. And it kept me going in the process because I had an external reward-based accountability system. And finally, getting to emotions. It's important to remember that feelings are a kind of knowledge. And so as you're working on your dissertation and navigating a lot of different kinds of knowledge, both empirical knowledge from your research as well as theoretical knowledge from all of this education that you have, you're also navigating a kind of emotional knowledge. And writing can be difficult, especially writing a dissertation. Remember that we talked about the dissertation as a really meaningful document and a really meaningful symbol of how far you've come in grad school and life. That means the dissertation on its own is going to create feelings, it's going to create emotions, and you're navigating those emotions at the same time that you're navigating the actual substantive work and the substantive stuff of the dissertation. And so if you feel resistant to writing, or if you're starting to feel avoidance toward writing, it's not because there's something wrong with you, and it's not because you're not good enough to write this dissertation. It's because you're trying to protect yourself, and your bodyguard, that is your body's natural protective instinct, is trying to protect you. So redefining your relationship with writing and creating a writing process that helps you thrive starts by acknowledging what your relationship to writing is right now and how that relationship can be repaired in order to have it be more thriving and fulfilling for you. The truth about writing is that it is hard and it is difficult for everyone. I've never met a writer who's been able to say that writing is easy. There is some amount of effort required to write and to write well. It's also important, especially with the dissertation. This is a high stakes writing project. So all of that means that there is potential for risk and reward in this writing process. And the more high stakes it is and the more challenging and difficult it is, the easier it is for your bodyguard to take over and move you away from writing, make writing far away, because that's what your body thinks it needs to protect you from that discomfort. But acknowledge that discomfort, acknowledge the relationship you currently have with writing so you can start thinking about how to change and develop that relationship so that it's more positive and fulfilling for you. And so to do that, I think it's helpful to cultivate as often as you can compassion. And by compassion, I also mean grace towards yourself, patience towards yourself, and developing a learner's mindset. Allow yourself to think of yourself as someone who is still learning how to do this, even though you're at the end or toward the end of grad school. So start taking notice of your negative self-talk, which I call gremlins, around writing. Start paying attention when their voices emerge. Start naming them if you can. Just notice that negative self-talk. And then try to put that self-talk away or acknowledge it and put it somewhere else. Just start developing some patience and compassion. Respond to your negative self-talk with how you would hope your friend or colleague would talk to you about your writing. You can also cultivate as often as possible joy, curiosity, discovery, or satisfaction. All of these things are pleasurable things. So you can find gratitude in moments of flow or insight. If you have a really productive writing session, take a moment to intentionally feel that pleasure and feel that joy. Take a moment to express gratitude for that productive session, or when you have a discovery in your dissertation writing process, take a minute to mindfully see and feel that, and feel how satisfying that is, and let yourself cultivate that pleasure. Finally, I also recommend engaging in reflection. So this might take the form of mindfulness, self-knowledge, or self-awareness. So I think it's good to keep a journal or a writer's log to track strategies that you've tried and that whether or not they worked or didn't work. So if you try turning off your Wi-Fi, or if you try writing in a different kind of space, write that down and have a moment at the end of your writing session to just rate how useful that was on a scale of 1 to 10. And just take a few notes and just take one moment to reflect on, do I like this strategy? Did it work for me? Do I want to try something else in the future? It's also helpful to cultivate as much as you can this idea of mindfulness is to start every writing session with a goal and an intention. So if you can set a goal and intention, that helps you stay reflective and mindful throughout your writing time. And if you've worked with the Writing Hub before, you know we are really big fans of goals and intentions. And if you're not sure what this is, I do highly recommend you join a writing retreat to learn more. So at this point, we have reached the end of our strategies. We've talked about behavioral, artisanal, social, and emotional strategies that can help you thrive in the writing process. And at this point, I'd like to invite you to go to the companion worksheet and make a 12-week writing plan. And whenever you make a writing plan, I think it's important to make a plan keeping in mind 3 different dimensions. The first is a plan for your writing product. This is the thing you're trying to get done, your dissertation. But it's also helpful to make a plan for your writing process. And finally, it's helpful for you to make a plan for yourself as the writer. So thinking about the product, think about the kind of progress you'd like to make in your dissertation in the next 12 weeks and the smaller tasks or actions you'd need in order to make that happen. When thinking about the process, think about what it would mean to write regularly for you in the next 12 weeks. What would that look like? What would that number be? Think about when and where you can make yourself available for writing your dissertation and what will likely get in the way. And if you can plan ahead for those obstacles and think about how you'll navigate through and maneuver around that obstacle, that's better than being caught off guard by that. And then finally, think about yourself as a person, as a writer. Who can support you during the next 12 weeks? How would you like to be held accountable and by whom? What kind of rituals or actions might make you feel good in this writing process? And how can you build those in? So take a moment when you can and make a 12-week writing plan using the companion worksheet, which will help you think through all of these different dimensions. So this is the end of our resource. And the last part of the companion worksheet is an ending reflection on how you want to move on from here. What do you want to keep going forward? What did you learn about the dissertation by engaging with these videos? What did you learn about yourself as a dissertation writer? And where do you want to go from here? You can write all of this down in your worksheet. And if you like, that companion worksheet can be the start of a writer's log that you can keep adding to as you work on your dissertation. As you continue working on your dissertation, remember that the Writing Hub is here for you. We have several resources to help you finish strong and bring others into your writing process. You can make a writing consultation with a graduate writing consultant for one-on-one support and feedback. You can come to the Daily Writing Room, which is a space, a time and place to write every morning in the company of peers. You can join a writing retreat, either a 5-week retreat or a 5-day retreat, to get dedicated time and space to write, but also learn how to cultivate mindfulness and compassion and sustainability in your writing process. And then, of course, we have writing workshops every week that explore a number of different topics. These workshops are by grad student writers for grad student writers. If you'd like to make an appointment, it's really easy to do that. And I recommend making an appointment with a grad writing consultant for a lot of different reasons. You can get support with brainstorming ideas, feedback on what you have, or feedback on ideas in process. You can get support with revising, with accountability. It's a broad, holistic support for you as a writer of a dissertation. So to make an appointment with a grad writing consultant, go to writinghub.ucsd.edu, hover over the grad students tab and click make an appointment. That will take you to a new website, MyWC Online, which is where we have our scheduling portal. On that website, you can make an account or log in and you can see all of the grad consultants' availability and book your own appointment. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to engage with this resource, and I hope you found it valuable. The Writing Hub is here to support you as you finish your dissertation and finish strong. Thank you for watching.